You know, Google's an interesting place, and before I go into it, I wanted to share a few comments, but I wanted to share a couple interesting things that I observed and kind of reflections as I was listening to those comments. The first was that I want to be upfront and clear. From the outside, almost any institution looks terrific. Google looks, you know, people say wonderful things. Google is big and mighty and all-powerful. It's sort of the Oz of the internet, right? The reality, as a member of the leadership team, is that there's so many things we can always do better, and so many things that don't go well, and things that we do wrong. And when we get them wrong, we try to apologize. And when you're a big organization, a big institution, you actually make big mistakes sometimes. And so the first thing I wanted to start by saying and sharing is that, you know, from the outside, there's a certain view. And depending where you are in the world, and depending your station in the world, your view may be very different. But I'll honestly tell you, from the inside, it's a bunch of people trying to do the right thing. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't. And we're trying to get better. And so I know there's a lot of big topics being discussed in the continent, locally. You've raised a lot of them. Future of journalism is a critical, critical one. You know, I was born in a communist country. I was born in Romania. Not too far from here, but a world away. And when I came to the United States, and as I grew up and would tell people what it was like to live under communism, they wouldn't believe me. Because they couldn't imagine a society where, as a child in school, you're told by the teacher, tell me what your parents said, and did they say anything against the government? And if you said, yeah, my dad said something against the government, your father would be taken by the secret police and questioned and interrogated, and sometimes disappear. Now, I left too young to have that personal experience, but that was the reality of life under that regime. And when I came to America and was brought to America by my father, by my mother, it gave me a tremendous appreciation for what freedom of speech means, for what liberty means. And a lot of those concepts actually originated on this continent or just off the shore in the United Kingdom. And they weren't invented in America, just like a lot of the things Google does weren't invented by Google. There's a lot of things we've learned, acquired, tried to improve on. But this fundamental notion of freedom and speech and equality is something that has always resonated for me, and it's something when I joined Google, when I met the executives who were leading the company at the time, that's why I joined, because it was a group of people who believed in freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And you can draw your own conclusions, and as citizens, informed, active citizens, you should. So that's one thing I want to start from. The other thing is, I want to share something that I have in my office. So in my office, this was the first sort of memento, the first tchotchke I accumulated. I have a small frame. It's not a fancy one. It's somebody bought it for $5 at a store. Little black frame, and inside it is a note card. And on that note card is printed the complete works of William Shakespeare, available free online. And when I joined Google, one of the first things I did, we were scanning books that were out of copyright because we wanted to make all the world's information, we wanted to organize it and make it accessible. And so there were people, hundreds of people standing all day scanning books, scanning every page of things that were out of copyright. And a few years later, we put all the books online, and the terms of service we set up were that anyone could use them. So Amazon very cleverly built a product called a Kindle and put all of our books that Google scanned, not our books, the world's books, and put them on the Kindle and launched the Kindle with a tremendous back catalog, and they built a great business out of it. And I'm delighted they did. But they started with the books that Google scanned and said, do with it what you will. And I'm not saying Google's all altruism. I'm not saying Google's a nonprofit. Google's a business. But what better gift could you give somebody anywhere in the world if you're trying to understand the human condition or the English language or psychology or any of these things than access to the complete works of William Shakespeare, free and online. So I thought it worth sharing given some of the comments and worth discussing and debating. Because as with anything, the way you get to truth is dialectic, right? This is Hegel. Thesis, antithesis, you come together, you have synthesis, and that's how you get to truth. And hopefully we'll get a little closer tonight, wherever we land. But I want to talk for just a few minutes about the book. So I wrote this book, and it was kind of a weird thing. The reason I wrote the book is related to what I've just shared. I realized, I don't know, what is the standard work week here in the Netherlands? How many hours is sort of statutory? Can someone help me? Someone? 40? Sorry? 35? I hear 40. It's like an auction. 35, 40. Do I hear 45? How many hours do people actually work? Do most people actually leave after 35 hours? Is that it? That's amazing. Okay, then don't worry about the book. You're fine. You don't have any problems. In the United States, in most countries, we have a 40-hour work week. People work more than that. And what I realized was, typically you spend, if you actually add up the hours, you spend more time working than you do, in many cases, sleeping on those nights. You spend more time working than you do with your friends, more time than on your hobbies. Even if it's a 35-hour work week, you probably spend more time working than you do with your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend, the people you love the most. And for too many people in the world, work is a miserable experience. It's a means to an end. It's just a way to make a buck. It's something you have to do so you're able to do these other things. And so I joined Google, and what I discovered is that actually work can be pretty good. It's not fun all the time. There's hard times, but it can be ennobling. It can be empowering. It can connect you to something meaningful. And the reason I wrote the book was because the longer I've been at Google, the more I saw that it wasn't just Google that had figured this out. You know, in the UK, there's a retailer called John Lewis, and every employee of John Lewis, I see heads nodding. They're an owner, and what's it like when you go to a John Lewis store? They take care of you, right? No one has a gun to their head. There's no manager saying you must do this. They do it because it's the right thing, because they feel like owners. We have a grocery chain in the United States. They're a grocer called Wegmans. And before Google was ever named the best company to work for, it's an award we've won. We didn't fight for it. People give you prizes. Wegmans was named the best company to work for in America. And I was introduced to their chief operating officer. They put us on stage because the organizer of the conference said, these guys aren't going to agree on anything. You know, Google has 30% profit margins, or 20%, whatever they are these days. Google has tens of thousands of people. People have advanced degrees, graduate degrees, PhDs. It's a technology company. It's publicly held. Wegmans is a family-owned firm with 1 or 2% profit margins. Most of their employees barely finish high school. And people join and they stay there their whole careers. It's a regional company. It's completely different. And Jack and I became the best of friends. Because they'd say, how do you treat your people? We treat them well. We do too. What does that mean? We give them freedom. I said, we have 20% time. We allow people to spend 20% of their time doing whatever they want. And Jack said, actually, we do the same thing. If there's something that's right for the customer, we let them do whatever they need to do. And we don't judge them for it. They said, what about transparency? Well, I said, well, at Google, everybody in the company, every quarter, our chairman, he shares the report that the board of directors sees with the entire company so that we all know what's going on. What do you do at Wegmans? Well, actually, everyone has access to the company's books. And on and on and on we went. And we realized, except for the one important difference, that one is an internet company and one is a grocer, we were exactly the same. And so I thought about all that and said, we got to tell this story. Because work can be meaningful and empowering. And even if you think about people who have awful jobs, who have terrible jobs, they have moments where work means something. I have a friend named Amy Recency. She's a professor at Yale University, and she studies this question. And she looked at whether people can find meaning in their work. She found that 1/3 of people, regardless of profession, she looked at doctors, lawyers, janitors, housekeepers, everything in between. 1/3 of people do their jobs because it's a way to make a buck. It's a way to make money. 1/3 of people, and it's very convenient, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's much easier to remember. But 1/3 of people do their jobs because it's a game to win. I want to get promoted. I want to get ahead. And 1/3 of people find meaning in their work, regardless of profession. She went to janitors, housekeepers in a hospital. And she said to them, she observed in a coma ward. She goes to a coma ward, and these patients are totally non-responsive. They just lie there. They're sick. They're desperately ill. No opportunity for recovery, no hope. And what she found was these janitors were taking the art off the walls and moving them to different rooms. And she said, why would you do that? That's not your job. And the woman she was talking to, most of them were women, most of them black, she said, why would you do this? And they said, I feel like in some small way, I'm helping them. She said, they're just lying there. But maybe, she was told, there's a way to get a response. Maybe where I'm stimulating them a little bit, maybe there's some beneficial effect. And Amy said, you could get fired for this. Your job is to change the sheets. Your job is not to change the decorations. And what this woman told her was, it doesn't matter. I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing something meaningful. I'm helping them. And it's the right thing to do. And what Amy demonstrated is that for just about any job, you can find that connection. And 2/3 of us don't find it automatically, but you can help people find it. So back to Google. The idea behind this is, I think a lot of jobs can be more meaningful. Not everyone can get to work for like a fancy technology company. Not everyone gets to work for a great manager. But there's things within our control and within our manager's controls that can transform how work feels. So at Google, for example, people look at the beanbags, the lava lamps, the free meals we provide to people and say, well, you're Google, you can do all this stuff. You could take all that stuff away. There's three things that drive what we do at Google, that makes people happy to be there, that makes the place work. A mission that is meaningful, organize the world's information. You can agree or disagree with it. But what our employees tell us is that they're there because they feel like they're doing some good for the world. You can debate whether it's good or not, but that's how they feel, right? And you see that again and again in a variety of professions, and Amy's work shows that. The second thing is transparency. So I mentioned that Eric Schmidt, our chairman, shares the board of directors reports with everybody. When you join Google as an engineer, you get access to our code base, which means a new engineer can see how Google's search algorithms work. Now, they can't see user data, because that's actually not our information, that's your information. In fact, if you're an engineer and you access user information, there's only one thing that happens. You get fired. And there's not a debate, there's not a conversation. If you look at somebody's personal information, we fire you. And very few people are even able to do that. When it happens, off with their head. But we allow them to see how our algorithms work. And what could happen is somebody could look at that and then go work for Microsoft. They could go work for another company. We trust them not to. We're transparent. Everyone's goals in the company, everyone can see them. And then we give people voice. We help them shape the way the company works. So every week we have an employee meeting. And everyone is invited. It's called TGIF. Stands for Thank God It's Friday. We hold it on Thursday, of course. And we hold it actually Thursday night so that people in Asia can watch it live. And there's 30 minutes of conversation from Larry Page and Sergey Brin, our founders, about here's what happened in the last week. And then 30 minutes of questions. And you can ask anything. You can ask about tax policy and the future of journalism. You can ask about, is what we did in China right or wrong? You can give product feedback. You can even say, as people often do, I think our chairs are uncomfortable. Can we have nicer chairs? And it's okay. And Larry and Sergey will answer the questions. But this idea that you can speak to power and have a direct relationship, that whether you're employee number 6 or whether you're employee 56,000, you can actually sit down with these founders and say, here's what I think, and they'll listen. They don't have to do that. It's actually kind of annoying a lot of the time. But they choose to because we believe that giving people voice makes the company better. And I gave you examples. It's not something that's at all unique to Google. Because one of the messages of this isn't just a Google thing, and you don't have to be like Google. I'm not saying go out and you got to be just like us. What I found is that there's a tremendous amount of things that a lot of companies are doing that a lot of people just don't know to think of or how to do. So for example, it turns out people are really biased. People are really biased. We don't realize we are. But we like people who are like us. And we don't think about it, but we'd rather be with people who follow the same sports teams, people who like the same things, people who grew up. If you meet somebody who kind of has a similar background, you're more inclined to like them. That's okay. It's the way we are. It turns out that little tiny bit of bias that every single one of us has, whatever color skin we have, whatever religion we have, we all have biases. It actually changes the way people hire people and interview people, and that's why you see things like women being paid less than men in a lot of companies. It's why you see companies having diversity statistics that don't look good. There's other kinds of bias too. When you're evaluating someone's performance, there's something called recency bias. If we just had a great meeting and I'm supposed to give you your performance rating, well, I'm going to think you were fantastic, even though I'm supposed to be evaluating you for the last 6 months. So we try to eliminate those kinds of things at Google. So when we do performance ratings, there's a little handout that everyone gets. It's very sophisticated. It's a piece of paper. And it says, basically, hey, there's this thing called recency bias and something called halo and horns effect. And we create a language where people go, oh, wait, this is recency bias. I can't give that rating. I have to give one that is more fair. And when we make hiring decisions, we don't allow a manager to make a hiring decision. We take that power away because we're biased. And instead, there's a separate committee that makes the hiring decision because what we care about is an unbiased, high-quality decision. And there's a tremendous amount of research and science that we've done, but also that actually academics have done that we back up. So one of the things I hope to share, and we can talk about in the Q&A, is where all this comes from and how it works and why it works. But if you're not Google and you don't want to be Google, and why should you? What you can do immediately and easily is when it comes to hiring, if you're in a position to hire people, and you're the hiring manager, write down your questions that you asked in the interview, write down the answer, write down your assessment, and then give that to somebody else and say, you tell me if I should hire that person. Because that other person won't have seen the candidate. They won't know if they have an accent. They won't know if they're short or tall or fat or thin. They won't know if they're a man or woman. They'll just know, here was their answer to this question. And you'll start making better, more objective, higher quality decisions that are also more fair. So there's a whole bunch of that stuff we can talk about. But the comment I'll close on, the thought I'll close on is this. Fundamentally, and this is actually part of the reason why I chose this profession. You know, most of my career wasn't in human resources. I started a nonprofit. I taught English in Japan. I tutored students. I taught summer school. I was an actor, briefly. I was an extra on a show called Baywatch. Some of you may have heard of it. A couple times, one fan. I worked at a small company, a big company. I did all kinds of things. And then one day I decided to go into human resources. And I'd been to business school, and I was at a company called McKinsey & Company, which is a very fancy consulting firm. And it's a great firm. And I realized my whole career I'd been frustrated because leaders espouse a set of values and they never quite live up to them. Which is why it's so easy for me to say, hey, we don't live up to all this all the time. Right? Like, we're human. We're not perfect. Leaders, also not perfect, but I was so frustrated. I was in my sort of late 20s, and it really bugged me that companies would say, and managers would say, people are our most important asset. Talent matters more than anything. There's a war for talent, we're going to win it. And then turn around and treat their people so poorly. So I decided to go into human resources, and, you know, I called a couple companies, got a job. 3 years later, Google called me and took a shot. They gambled and they hired me, even though I actually wasn't remotely qualified for this job. And history will tell if it was a good decision or not. Maybe it's all my fault. We'll see. But the biggest lesson I learned is that you have to live your values. And that's trite. It's easy to say, live your values. What does that mean? Well, if you believe people are good, ethically, morally, fundamentally good, endowed by their creator with goodness. Oh, that feels good to say here. That's really cool. I've never done that before. But if you believe people are fundamentally good, if you believe talent is important and all these kinds of things, you're going to act that way. Most companies don't. Most teams don't. Most managers don't. What they do is they say, yeah, people are important. I believe people are good. And then they hide information from you. And they don't give you freedom to make your own decisions. And they micromanage you. They do all the things we hate as employees. And my fundamental argument is you have to live your values. And if you believe people are good, you will give them freedom. And if you give them freedom, they will amaze you. And if you don't want to give them freedom, that's okay. But don't go around saying that people are good and people are the greatest asset. Be honest. But I believe people are good, and you should give them freedom. So with that, I'll pause.